Here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our artist talk for this week. With me today, I have a great artist and a friend who I met in the vertical crypto art residency, third cohort actually. And ever since meeting them, I was like, "Yo, you do some fucking sick ass work." And seeing the nature of the work evolve, and also the inspiration behind the work, has been really interesting and how it's sort of utilized and used within the space. And so with me today, I have Claudia Pawlak. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. But if you want to
You
introduce
got it.
yourself,
You got it.
perfect. I got perfect. I win all the NFTs. um,
Yeah.
if you could, if to those listening who are not familiar with your work, if you want to introduce yourself quickly, please go ahead.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Anubis, for having me on. Hey, everyone. My name is Claudia Pawlak. I'm an artist based here in Toronto, Canada. And my practice mainly takes a look at analog mediums. I've been a photographer since honestly as long as I can remember. I did the whole academic photographer thing and went to school to study photography, got a BFA in 2019, and then decided like right after that I wanted to do a master's degree in arts management and leadership, which just kind of like took a bit more of like an administrative look at galleries and museums from like an executive level and how to run them and marketing, etc. I was just kind of like really interested in the machine of that, but still very much kind of working on my own arts practice at the same time. And that's sort of like towards the end of that time for me when I graduated in 2020. That was also the start of the pandemic. So that's kind of when I ventured into this whole world of NFTs and blockchain and started minting my own work, got involved with a few different initiatives like vertical crypto art with Anubis here in the third cohort residency. Also getting involved with some DAOs like Raw DAO and just minting some work as well as, I was commissioned by Obscura to create a body of work called In Translation, and that is kind of where my arts practice is at now. And In Translation looks at analog photography, specifically cyanotype printing, as well as the subject matter of printing AI generated botanicals. So that's kind of where I'm working in right now. I feel like my practice has slowly shifted in that regard to this like hybrid mixed media of working with in the context of the historic photography process, such as cyanotype printmaking, but also kind of exploring this new medium that I'm very, very still exploring for the first time. And I find like the very early stages of my work and research in AI, but also looking at AI generated botanicals and kind of what does that mean to bring to life these plant specimens that only really have an existence once they're printed out as cyanotypes. So that's kind of the angle, the intersection of where I'm working at right now.
Yo, you came prepared. Holy shit. I
Thank you.
there's so much I actually want to talk about. I was like, goddamn. First thing, you have an MFA? You have your master's?
I have an MA. Yeah, that's something I don't actually talk a lot about. I don't know why. I never bring it up, but yeah, I just like, I don't know. I just did school and then I wanted to do more school and then I got sick of school.
Nice.
So,
I respect shit. Like I met up with some school friends 2 weeks ago, and only then did I feel like, fuck, maybe I should try to do a master's. But then I remember essay writing, and it freaks me out.
mhm.
Uh, uh, I'm assuming you finished, and you went through like the whole defense and dissert. Is that right? You defend your essay and stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yeah, so it was interesting because it
Mhm.
kind of went all virtual right towards the end because it was like a 1 year program and it started like May of 2019 and ended April 2020. So yeah, the pandemic really started affecting us here in Canada, I think like March. So everything suddenly became virtual. We were actually finishing off like internships as a class, like towards the end of the degree. And I was doing
See
my internship at the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, actually, which
what?
is interesting
Hey,
because yeah, it influenced a lot of my practice now, which like is kind of a subconscious thing that happened because my internship was in like marketing for museums, but then I was also like super interested in the archive of botanical specimens they had there. So I little did I know back then it would have influenced my NFT practice now. Like it's just wild to think about those things. But yeah, I did have a thesis that I wrote on like digital marketing strategies for museums
I
and like
see.
acquiring membership or members rather into museums through like digital strategies. So very much kind of more like I feel like I have two brains when I kind of navigate the art world. I have like me and my own practice, and then I also have kind of like bigger picture, like marketing and strategy, and like administration of like artist run centers and how do we create groups to support artists and elevate work as much as we can. So I feel like I'm always working in parallel with those two different things.
I mean, that's really great to hear, and also the fact that you went to the Ottawa National, the Natural Gallery of Ottawa. That's kind of cool because I've been there. It's one of my favorite museums. It is yeah, the Nature Museum, especially. Funny enough, the coolest part to me wasn't even the dinosaurs, the replicas of the bones and stuff.
I
It
love the dinosaur exhibition.
they're cool. They're really cool. Like looking at a big ass bone or like a fucking whale hanging like that was cool. But their insects
Yeah.
frames, those were amazing to look at. And it's like it was one of those moments where I realized like, damn, I wish. Well, I imagine people still do that. That's why the museum still has them on display. But like, I wish there was like a sort of um, showcase
Yeah.
of nature in this way more. You don't. It's
Hmm.
like um, and I'm also you mentioned your photography. I went on your website, and to my surprise, your earlier work is a bit is completely sort of different from the work you're currently working.
Hmm.
And I'm really curious because like my whole one of my favorite things about artists is when you see the process of growth and change, right? And so it appears that you've gone through well, the NFT space forces people to change in weird ways. um
Hmm.
but how did the change come about fully? I mean, you're still like you mentioned, you're still messing with traditional media like cyanotypes, but the idea of sort of mixing cyanotypes with AI generated botanicals, that's very interesting, right? And like how'd you get to there from like, you know, just like photography or film photography, large format or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's so strange, isn't it? Because like thinking about like AI technology and machine learning, it feels so far advanced from these practices that we've been working with for decades and decades, like cyanotype printing, and any kind of like historic photo process, daguerreotypes, anthotypes, etc. And it's interesting to like pair them together and try to figure out connections between the both of them. But like to give you some context, the work that I did previously, like for example, in 2018 and 2019, I created a body of work called Serce Matki, which in Polish means mother's heart, and it's a portrait work. It's very conceptual. It's kind of, in a nutshell, looking at my relationship with my mother as it kind of
Mm,
evolved from, I was very young back then. Not that that was too long ago, but it still feels
mm,
like a world away. But I was kind of entering this period with my relationship with my mom where we were both kind of realizing that I'm finishing school, I'm kind of leaving this
mm,
like security of like the family nest. My younger sister was too, and I had moved in and out of home before then, so it wasn't like a big deal for me, but this is the
mm,
first time that I think she really felt it, especially with her only daughters kind of leaving the family home and finding like that she's always been so comforted by having her daughters always around her, and now finding the sense of like not being so dependent on one another and just like becoming just independent of each other and just taking space away and time away to grow in
mm,
separate directions, I think was really important for me to just process by photographing. And in that time I was also like photographing her archive of material objects that she brought to Canada when she immigrated from Poland, just to better understand like her identity outside of motherhood. So I've always been very influenced by like what's going around me, either like emotionally, or just like on a family level, friendship. And I guess now it's very much what's influenced me is like what's going on around me, like technologically. and just like being in the space and just seeing kind of the different mediums advancing and popping up, and it's really piqued my interest. So then to like switch a little bit, with the cyanotype work, I had always been interested in the concept of cyanotype printing, which really became popularized by Anna Atkins, who was a botanist in the 1800s. And she was a scientist, and she used this printmaking process to essentially photograph, before we really had photography, photograph like specimens, particularly photographs of British algae at the time, because other than that, if you didn't have any way of documenting these specimens, you just had illustrations that other scientists and artists would just draw and just be like, well, here's the specimen, here's like a visual of like how to identify these specimens when you go into the field and research and be a scientist. But she would photograph these specimens, and it kind of created this like movement almost, where she was kind of like doing it for scientific purposes, but now we look back on it and we consider it to be art, which is like really interesting how she kind of started this and really inspired generations of people to continue to do the same thing, mostly now for like artistic purposes. And so in looking back at that dialogue, it was interesting to me that when we see a cyanotype, we automatically associate it with, oh, that object that's being photographed, it's real, it has organic, like it's organic, it's tangible, you can touch it, it has some kind of real substance to it, it has an existence. Like, for example, if you were to create a cyanotype print of leaves, which is something like a very common
Mm.
subject matter that a lot of people, when they're playing with this for the first time, kind of take like natural objects and just do that naturally. And and then I was kind of playing with the idea of, well, what if I were to create a series of like AI generated botanicals and then print them out as cyanotypes? And what is that kind of saying about this like authority of the cyanotype? Of like, we often associate the cyanotype with photographing a real object, but the AI isn't necessarily quote unquote real. It's created from a collective of images or memory or whatever have you. And so I found that really interesting. Like, what does that say about photography? What does that say about photographing like AI generated life? Like, what does that say about the collaboration between the machine and the artist? So in doing this work, I just have a lot of questions. I do not have all the answers, but that's kind of where I'm working in right now, is like I'm seeing these specimens that I'm generating through GANs, and more recently just like word prompt AI as well, like Midjourney
Mhm.
and like DALL-E 2, and bringing them like to life literally by photographing them with sunlight.
So there's a lot of interesting things actually, that you touched on. Um, at least to me, one, I see some parallels, right, in between your older projects, um, and even the one that you're doing. Essentially, sort of. So you're while you were talking about the photography project that you did with your mom, it's sort of as if you're recording a bit of history. You're recording the current state of your mom and your relationship with her, but the certain documents that you've recorded, right? It's like you're gazing on this old history that is your parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're sort of doing the same thing with the cyanotypes, but the sort of difference is the action taken, right? Because with the photography project with your mom, you're just taking a photograph of history, right? But with this sort of AI infused cyanotype, it's as if you're working hand in hand with history, because you're using a trained model on specific images, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we had talked in DMs when I was like, "Yo, do you want this link to these cyanotypes?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure." And then I was like, "Yo, these are sick." And then you're like, "Oh, that's I believe her. You just mentioned her name, but I'm
That
blanking
was
out."
Anna Atkins' work that
Yeah,
you sent me. Yeah.
and you're like, "Yeah, that's her." I was like, "Oh, okay, right, you know what this." um, but like the fact that you can train an AI on images that were produced in you know 1843, according to New York Public Library's database, right? And then produce something that is current and actively. interacting with our current time in that sense, right? It's like it's a different nature, but it's a different nature of the relationship, but it's sort of a relationship with history in that sense. Um, and I think sort of that's really interesting. And I'm also curious because I have a friend of mine, a fellow painter. She also happens her parents, or I think her mom or her dad, I don't remember which side. They were also Polish immigrants. Um,
Oh, nice.
and one thing I fucking love about sort of Polish culture is um the donuts that you guys have.
Oh
There's
my God, the pączki,
yeah,
pączki. I love them. Yep.
that is, I live right by a Polish bakery because there's a really nice chain of Polish bakeries in Montreal, and I get those. Um, but the other thing is the garments, right? And so have you thought about exploring like floral garments at all? Because a lot of garments, or at least my quick Google search showed me that a lot of garments seem to have floral designs in them as well. I was just curious.
Yeah. Yeah, so really interesting point there, and it's something I've actually considered a little bit, is that like even in Polish folklore,
Mhm,
there's a lot of botanical imagery. And it's just that's kind of how it's always been, and it's passed down like through
mhm,
family members from generation to generation, either through like paper crafts, like cutting out paper and like gluing like different pieces of papers together, or even in the garments, like the traditional kind of like Polish like folkwear is like often has many florals, like specifically I'm thinking like red and greens. And I've thought about that a lot, and I've played with some like word prompt AIs, just putting in like, oh, a photograph of a flower influenced by Polish folklore, and then I'll often see those like elements of the reds and the greens that come out. And I'm not happiest with those outputs when I've tried them, but maybe I just haven't found the right tool to do so, to really match what I'm looking for. But it's so funny in that I think like subconsciously I'm like, growing up, have I always just been like surrounded by flowers in a way, like even like growing up in the family home, like my mother, just even thinking of like the blinds, had always had some kind of like floral decor on them, or like we had doilies all over the house that really spoke that language of like the Polish folklore, and like the floral decals that are often like connected directly with it. So maybe like subconsciously it's like really influenced me to have this fascination with archives of florals, of like plant specimens. But yeah, I think probably that's maybe something I want to explore down the line, is like incorporating my own like heritage into it as well.
I've looked at garments, and it's like funny enough. I asked my dad once. He was like, "Hey, I'm going to the fabric market. Do you want anything?" And I was like, "Could you just send me?" I knew at the time like the markets in Egypt had um sort of what you would classify in Egypt as like pharaonic patterns, right? Which is
Hmm.
sort of the ancient Egyptian style of lotuses and stuff. And then I told him like just send me some fabrics, like I want to paint on them. Um and he sent me three large, like I think over 2 meters by 2 meters fabrics. But the really interesting thing that I noticed was it was pharaonic uh pattern mixed with Islamic pattern. Um and then the public New York Library dataset, they have a really large sort of database for Egypt. And I was going through, I found a few pictures that were like fabric designs and fabric patterns and just general Egyptian patterns, like pharaonic patterns from the time.
Hmm.
And it was really interesting to see certain cultural aspects that have active usage, right? Not just
Yeah.
depictions, but like having them embedded in fabric and stuff. For some reason, have survived a really long time, and they survive elements of immigration and even like sort of new identity formation, all that. And you still,
Hmm.
and to me, that's always been really interesting, just because it's sort of like a sign of the culture surviving, and also in a place like Canada, to me, it's like I get really excited in the future, right? Because then when you have all these cultures and then this slowly get together and over like say 200, 300 years, what sort of fabrics will come out of this place, you know? Because every place with
Hmm.
really cool fabrics has come here, you know. And so I've always found that to be really interesting, and yeah, I mean, it's really cool too because like it is one of the ways people can get closer to their cultures, you know, just through the fabric.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially when it's like authentic imagery. I think there's something really, really special about that.
It's like it's the good stuff.
Mhm.
um, so well, how has been the Sienna type so far with AI? Like, I see the pictures you've been posting, and like those look insane. Like like your work has essentially started to push me personally slowly to start messing with Sienna types again, because I only mess with them
Oh,
during.
yes, yes.
But my mom, she got me a bunch of papyrus paper, and I was like, I'm gonna try Sienna types
Hmm.
on papyrus paper because like I was surprised papyrus really takes oils very well. Um, but how have you been finding those Sienna types AIs?
It's been a different process now than when I first started getting back into it in at the end of last year, at the end of 2021, when I was working on that commission for Obscura. In that, like with the initial commission, like for in translation specifically, it I was working with an archive from the Biodiversity Heritage Library, which is like an open source digitized archive of specifically botanical illustration, so not exactly photography, but it's like open source. You can just take it and really do anything with it, which allows for a lot of creativity, which I find to be great. And I'm a huge fan of having access to libraries and like digitized works. So big fan of them. And so I would just go through these archives and pick different collections and then input them into a GAN. And then if I found any outputs from that GAN that I really liked, I would save them, and then I'd have to convert them in Photoshop to create like a essentially a digital positive on transparency paper so I can use that to overlay on the cyanotype. And when I was doing this originally, when I treated the paper, it
Mhm.
was the dead of winter when I was doing a lot of these prints, and that's like the worst time to cyanotype
There's
print. I
no
don't know
sun.
why. Yeah, there's no sun. The UV index is like nothing. Some prints were out there for hours and they got like covered in snow, and I would just sigh
Oh
and like take them inside. They
no.
were in like a contact frame, like a pretty heavy duty contact printing frame. So they didn't get ruined at all, but it was just annoying because I kind of left them outside thinking they were exposing the whole time when really it
Mhm.
had started snowing. And I like took them in and kind of just like wiped them off and then like started over the next day. So it's a lot of patience. Like I find especially cyanotype printing when you're working with the natural sunlight and like not a UV lamp, it really tests your patience, and it's a process that you cannot speed up because there's just so much that not that it can go wrong, but there's just so much that like will create a different print each time you do your print making. So for example, I tweeted about
Mm.
this earlier, maybe like last week, but just comparing, when we talk about the NFT space and scarcity, like cyanotype printing, it's truly such a scarce process in that each print is a one of one because you can't make a duplicate, even like as much how hard as you try, like the paper quality might be different, or the way that you brushed on that chemistry, or maybe the quality of sunlight was different that day, or maybe how you placed your object on the paper. Like there's so many different factors at play here that like you cannot make an exact replica in cyanotype printing. And so, yeah, it really tests your patience. The work that I've been doing now, I've been doing these little like 16 by 9 aspect ratio prints with these new outputs I've created using a text prompt AI,
Mm.
and I find that there's so much more of a photographic quality in them rather than when I was training my own GAN on illustrations. And I'm just in love with the outputs I've been getting now. Like the AI is really producing like they look like photographs when I look at like just the raw outputs when I download them before I convert them in Photoshop to be printed. It's wild, and I really love how the technology is advancing so much that we can get these like photorealistic outputs of these like otherworldly plant
Mhm.
specimens and now be able to print them as cyanotypes. And I've always liked kind of working on this line of, if I were to show my work to someone for the first time and they knew nothing about me, would they think that this is a real plant, or would they think like, oh, there's something strange about it, or like uncanny valley and I can't point my finger on what it is. I've always like wondered about the reaction and like how close can I get to making it look as real as possible.
No, I mean that to me is also one of the favorite things about AI is when you start to mess like when you start to mess with like the perception of reality
Mm-hmm.
in sort of in an artistic manner. And I say artistic manner because I was literally in a space yesterday, VCA space today, where
Mm-hmm.
we were discussing AI, and a lot of people seem to be of the opinion that the moment they find out a work is, if they haven't been told the work is AI, then they find out that it's AI. It seemed, at least from the spaces I was in, that a lot of people, to them, they're like, "Oh, that's sort of lesser quality," right? But
Mm-hmm.
the more you get into AI, it's like, I even said that in the spaces. I was like, if you're training your own models and everything, it doesn't matter if you're using the output like straight up in that sort of sense, or it does it just you're slowly walking the AI along every step. You're the one that's using the training, right? The value
Mm-hmm.
of work has not changed because the computer did it, when you're the one that's sort of literally walking the AI through it. You're the ones that telling the AI like, "Hey, do this. No, no, don't do that. Do this." Right? And so, um, also, to me, the really cool thing is, to your point, also, is like, once you have to the realism, the reality point. Once you
Mm-hmm.
have a full realistic AI, the experimentation you can do is now no longer limited by money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prince the sun, like because in
Yeah.
Canada the sun just disappears for 6 months out the
Yeah.
year. It's just like, bye, see ya, we're going down there, we're going to
Mm-hmm.
Australia, they need us. We're like, all right. And so it just, I mean, yeah, before, like, it's like, the really cool thing to me is, right, I imagine you've messed with like large format photography, right? Or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like 4x5
yeah,
photography.
right. And it's like, that
Mm-hmm.
film is fucking expensive,
Yeah.
like extremely expensive. And so, even if you're just using AI for just simple ideation, you can use AI to like plan out certain photos, get the composition, understand the lighting you want before you go out and shoot film. Although film has its own problems at the time, but like, if you pick the perfect time of day and stuff and you've done your training, it's like, it's extremely useful. And then when it comes to what you're doing, which is the artistic process of like creating something entirely new, um, me personally, I think it's cool as hell, right? Because it's like, have you ever watched that video where
Mm-hmm.
it's like the book of like weird animals, in like languages unknown, undecipherable by archaeologists to this day. Have you ever heard about that book?
No, you're not talking about a Codex Seraphinianus, are you? That's another
Uh,
book that has like otherworldly like plant specimens, but I think you're talking about something else.
I think that could be it, actually. Well, it was a book that nobody knows what the writing is, but it depicts plants and it depicts like beings as well. Um,
I think
but
that's the Codex, yeah, and
okay,
it's not in any like specific language. It's like
yeah,
it looks like a language, but you can't decipher it. Yeah, I think that's what. Yeah,
right, and it's like,
yeah.
like, the fact that those animals are not real, like, that draws you to it. You're like, holy, like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
What does this mean? So I like to pretend
Yeah.
like this is like, this dude found a portal somewhere and he saw these animals for real, just for my amusement. But
Yeah, it's amazing. It's the human imagination is just such a wild thing, and I think that like assisted by machine learning, I think that we can create something that's like really wonderful together. And I'm like talking about the AI as if it's a person, but I do think it has kind of like based on the data you give it, I think that it really does have this kind of like dream sequence that it does, and it picks out images, and it tries to create images that are as real as it thinks can possibly be compared to the images that you provided it. And it's interesting to your point about like a lot of the dialogue that's happening right now with
Mhm.
finding out a work is AI generated when maybe the collector or viewer thought that it wasn't, and feeling like robbed somehow. I've like come to the conclusion in my mind to like how do I settle myself down about this is like I feel like we really need to let go of like what our perceptions of art should be and like how it should be created, and just like focus on how does it make us feel when we see it, like regardless of how it's made. Because I feel like history's been repeating itself in that when Photoshop first came out and like photographers were like really manipulating their images and then like posting them to like Flickr or like DeviantArt in like the 2010s or even before that, and like no one would look at that and be like, oh, I thought it was like a real painting and suddenly I feel robbed or something. When like photographers would manipulate their images to look like they were maybe an oil painting or something.
Mhm.
Like it's and maybe those conversations were happening, but it's kind of like an evolution of the tools that we have access to, and I think we should be celebrating those tools and not feeling robbed of like what could have been, or like feeling that there wasn't enough like sweat that went into like
It's true.
producing the specific work, right? And like the labor for whatever reason.
It's
Like
true.
it's so interesting to me.
Somebody in the space has literally said, like, man, why do people want artists to suffer?
I know, I know.
I was
It's
like,
so strange.
it's like I like a little bit of suffering, but like not that much suffering. Like freezing in the cold, snow over your photos, like
Hmm.
like if you're taking photos, like film photo, your shutter's frozen. There goes your shot. It's done.
Yeah.
Like, I personally like to your point about understanding AI. Like I've been messing with like VQ plus clip, I think it's called, um
Hmm.
style GANs, all that jazz. And you start to sort of learn the AI, you start to be able to work with it, you understand what it's able to generate, what it's not, so you guide it in a certain direction. um it's I've been in a Dolly mini hellhole because I bought an upscaler, and so it doesn't matter what size I generate stuff at. My upscaler does a pretty good job at upscaling them
Oh,
without
good.
loss of detail. And
Hmm.
I just discovered like Dali Mini can generate really good fuzzy Polaroids, and I've just been going crazy
Hmm.
with it with that. And it's like I was realizing yesterday, like, um, some of the images, at least personally, I've been saving them for texture, and without that, I would have literally had to. Like we've seen this on the timelines. Like, man, instead of going to Pinterest or Google and scrolling for 1,000 hours, or like not 1,000 hours, but scrolling for like an hour, to find the right
Hmm.
picture for texture or whatever. Now you can just go to the DALI Mini or whatever sort of AI of your choice and generate what you want quickly, and then utilize it for your artistic process, right? Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
and like, also to the scarcity point, you can't generate two DALI. You can't. I don't think you can generate AI image unless you literally use the same seed, the same starter image. And even then, do you think you would be able to generate the same image over and over? I don't think so. Or from your
I think it
experience?
would be like highly, highly unlikely that you would get the same image. I'm just like thinking about like you've played with GANs, like when
Mhm.
the outputs, at least like when I've played with like Runway ML, which is like the specific tool I use to create my GAN models, I get like thousands and thousands of outputs, and those are just the outputs that it's like presented me with, but like the data that it's constantly running like to create that, when it's like running all of that data is insane. So I'm just thinking about like these models like DALI and like Midjourney, like how much information they're just looking through, like what kind of archives, what kind of like databases of images, that it's, to me it's like a 1 in a million or a plus million chance of getting like a similar
Mhm.
exact replica, like the same output as someone else. Like I really don't think that's likely, but I would love to talk to maybe someone like Ivona Tao about that, like who's like
Mhm.
really invested in machine learning and really understands the ins and outs of it. I think like she'd be able to answer that a bit with like more detail and a bit more understanding of it.
And also, have you noticed this? Like the interesting thing about AI, aside from the outcry, is um you can tell who's legitimately like messing with the AI fully and who's just like generating random prompts like straight up into Midjourney while adding trending on ArtStation at the end, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's like I've noticed this when I think when like Style Gan when I realized Style Gan collabs happened, you could use them and I generated some stuff and then the flood of AI happened and it came in and then it just blended in and I was like, "Oh, okay, you got to push that further." And then now
Mhm.
I start to see it where it's like you have to even to the whole outcry is like you those who understand the AI. We're talking, yeah, we're literally talking about this thing as if it's like a being, like existing somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like to
Mhm.
talk to the AI. It's just like, um, it's like for you to understand what's being generated and stuff. Like it shows that you're actually doing more than most. Because like not a lot of people, for example, on Midjourney know that Midjourney can't generate cartoons for shit. Like it literally cannot generate cartoons to save its life. It's kind of
Aw,
hilarious. And then
yeah.
it's like, if you want to get some nice cartoons, you just go to Dali Mini or Dali. Do you have access to
Hmm.
Dali? I'm curious.
I actually just got access yesterday. I
Yo!
haven't posted about it yet because I wanted to like play around with it first. And I'm not someone who's like, I have access to this and you don't. Like, I don't really like kind of like,
You don't
I don't know.
flex on the
I feel
timeline?
bad. I feel bad. Like, I don't want to make anyone feel shitty. So I haven't like announced it yet. So you're hearing it first that I have access
Hey,
to Dolly 2. Yeah, I haven't gotten the chance to play with it yet, but I'm like really excited just to dive into it and like just look at what kind of like botanical outputs it'll produce for me.
I bet you it's gonna be insane. We had a spaces with AI. We had an AI competition where everybody was like,
Hmm.
generate. We're gonna generate Pokemon creatures. Um, and so I had used my Midjourney credits, and I like Google Collabs way too much to pay for the service. I like the freedom that a Google Collab gives you in
Hmm.
comparison to Midjourney and all that jazz. And
Hmm.
so I was like doing Dolly Mini, but I got like I generated a little tomato Pokemon. It was kind of fire. And then he had access to Roswell. We just had a talk with him last week. He had access to Dolly too. And like, we're going through the mid-journey outputs, it's the certain look of mid-journey generations. And then Raj just puts the fucking Dali generations and you're just like, oh, okay, bro. Shit.
It's over.
It's done. It's like it was one of those things where our works was like, yeah, that looks like an AI generated Pokemon. His looks like just a Pokemon. And we were like, okay, like Dali, like we're done. And so like I'm really excited once it opens to the public. And also, have you heard about Stable Diffusion?
I have. I just joined the Discord last week too, but I haven't had the chance to try it, but I hear it's like really, really great at generating faces.
Yo, you got all the alpha. God damn. I literally signed up to their thing, and they're like, "We're sending emails," and my email just been empty. I was just sitting there like, I want to generate anime faces, but yeah, that's releasing too, and that's gonna be I think open source, which is crazy. Um, right? I think so. I heard
Yeah.
somebody. Um, to me, the open source thing is a bit important because I realize Midjourney and even Dali doesn't allow you to generate certain prompts, and it, we understand the
Mhm.
safety reasons behind it, but also it's like it's weird, say you're an artist who does nude photography, not being able to generate nude photography on Dolly, because they don't
Mm-hmm.
want you to generate nudes. And you're like, okay, all right, I don't like what sort of. Actually, I'm curious. Let me ask you this. I was talking to a person on the timeline, and they brought this up as a problem with certain platforms, not your own AI that you train and you create, but like Midjourney and Dolly. Um, all these models are trained on thousands of years of images, um cultural, religious, whatever it is, even memes, but it's trained on everything that sort of every culture has created in the last 2000, 3000, 5000 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as this new tech overtakes old uh jobs, right, and it becomes the sort of foundation for art, what happens when culture becomes distilled through these platforms and these companies instead of through naturally, because everybody's using stuff that they generate from these models, but these models are sorry these the companies that have controlled these models have full control over what you're able to generate and what you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, what are your thoughts about that?
It worries me
Mm,
incredibly right now, as of the tech, like as of this moment, because something I'm realizing as I'm using kind of these different models is that they often have like a Western bias. And
mm,
there's a lot of biases that exist within these specific AI models. And that's probably due to how they source their images and like
mm,
right from the beginning, like in creating these databases of images, like who are the people who have either captured these images or uploaded them, or where have these images been found and sourced from. And so in thinking about like possibly having these tools take over any kind of jobs, like I'm thinking like specifically maybe like stock photography or any kind of like commercial advertising, it worries me a little bit because then I feel like we're kind of trapped in this like bubble of this information that only exists online, really. And then I think about like specific groups of people, often like marginalized groups of people who have these voices and backgrounds and very specific experiences that if all of a sudden AI is like kind of taking over these jobs and a lot of these opportunities that like real people, I feel so strange saying that, real people, but people of all different walks of life can just take it, really changes the narrative a little bit, and I don't think that's a good thing. So I'm kind of worried about it right now, and I would really like to just do more of a deep dive into like clip based models and where these images are coming from, how they were sourced, and really just grab an understanding of that. Because that's something that I do worry about, and I'm even concerned about in my own practices. Like when I'm looking at like these archives of botanical illustrations, like thinking about like the colonization of a lot of these works and thinking about like possible damage that that could do, and like what groups of people are being uplifted when I'm like using these works. So that's something that's always kind of on my mind and something that I think we should all be mindful of, like when we're using these tools.
and I couldn't agree more. I get worried. It's like the
Mm-hmm.
erasure of culture
Yeah.
is sort of like an easy thing to do because it's inherently like a destructive thing. It's a destructive method,
Mm-hmm.
and destruction is far easier than building, right? And so,
Yeah.
to your point, like the certain biases, I've realized that, okay, I've come across certain biases before. Where it's like, hold on, wait a minute, what is going on here? And it's just, I'm sort of a proponent of like run your own AI, um, or fork the
Mm-hmm.
AIs. Better yet, go against the companies, man. Let's destroy them, man. That's sort of. I don't know. It's like I'm a very sort of institute. Like I reject institutions heavily, and especially when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to like art creation. I'm like, yo, you make the tools. You don't get to say what we do, right? And
Yeah.
it's like even better yet, like you provide the framework. Let me build whatever. Like, don't give me a building. Give me like the foundation or whatever. I'll build the building. That sort of thing. Um, and also the other aspect for me is like the like, and this can't be ignored. But I don't want to talk about it because it can be like it's like the conspiracy theory of like the deception element of AI. Like once we hit photo real, the tech sort of a bit scares me. uh but this is like a worry that's not art related. It's more like life related, right? Where like now you can fabricate anything in reality. What can we do? And like people like to go crazy, but we have to see how it goes. I
Yeah, I think that like as we move forward, if we can just try to keep an element of the human experience there, I think that's really important. Like I'm even thinking about like I don't know, like a way that we could implement AI into just everyday life, just like cash registers at the store, right? Are just getting more automated, removing more jobs, becoming smarter, like and that scares me too because there's often a lot of times where I want to go to into a store and like talk to someone, like be serviced
Sure.
by someone, but just chat with them because maybe I haven't like spoken to anyone that day because I've been just inside on my computer all day. Like I
Sure.
think if we just like try to keep an element of humanity and just like try not to remove all of it in how we move forward, I think that's something that's really important to just like consider.
Yeah, no, it's like, and it's also I like, as much as I like the self checkout things, in malls. When you have something that you don't know the code to,
Yeah.
you just gotta literally stare at a screen. You're like, you literally can't help me, and I can't help you, and you just have to wait for a human who comes and
Yeah.
who knows the stuff, right? It's like it's wild. I part of like I remember somebody telling me like, hey man, like AI or can go through thousands of lifetimes um in like weeks. And I'm like, so why can't we like give it the equation to like achieving light speed and just like leave it for a
Yeah.
year? Like why can't we do that? Like why are we like doing all this stuff? Like why can't we just like, come on, give it like gravity stuff? Like how do we get to Mars? It will figure it out faster than Elon Musk. I you know. Um
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
you had mentioned a program called Runway ML. I was, what is that? I'm really curious about that. I've never heard of it actually.
Yeah, so it's kind of like if you've been using Google Colab to create your own GAN models, it's basically that, but it's more of a user-friendly interface. It like walks you through the process a little bit. So it's interesting, like when you first download Runway ML, it's kind of like advertised as a video editor, and it uses AI to like remove things like background or
Mm-hmm.
create like effects based on the movement in the image. But then it has like a function in the software called Runway ML Lab, I believe, and that's when you can go in there and either play with GANs that have already been trained by like other people on like photographs or illustrations, or you can just go in there and upload like your own photography, for example, and it'll just create outputs based on the information you give it. Yeah, it's all GAN based, but that was like my first introduction to GANs was using Runway ML. So I've kind of just always gone back to it just for like how familiar I've been with it now. I got really used to it, so it's a tool that I just tend to go back to. But it's really user friendly. I think it's a great introductory tool. Like if you're just teaching someone about GANs like for the first time, it's like a great way to play.
I don't know if you mentioned this. Can it train? Can you train your own models on it or no?
Yes, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and like, does that come with the free option? Because I went on the website, um,
Mm-hmm.
or because I realized I
So
yeah,
I'm trying to remember. I think the free option's very limited, but I think you can like play with like pre-trained models, but if you want to
I
train your
see.
own, you do have to pay a subscription, from what I remember.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's kind of cool actually. I'm legitimately waiting for the day when AI becomes like, hello, what would you like me to do? And I'll be like, create this, this, and this, go, and it will just do it, and I don't like. Yeah, when it's like, I wait for the day when AI becomes intuitive, in that sense, because like, I mean, like, when I sometimes use 3D modeling programs, I'll be like, I built a cube. Why is the ball going through the cube? oh, because I didn't set the collision modifier. So like you have to set like yeah, it's like oh, why is the cube floating? Oh, I have to set gravity. And so like I'm waiting for when programs just like
Hmm.
automatically know what to do. It's like oh, that's a cube. Oh, okay, collision model set to it. Or it's like AI is like oh,
Yeah.
you give it the prompt and it immediately knows what you're. If you're fully descriptive, it immediately knows what you want. You don't have to like oh, how do I wait for that day. It's gonna be a crazy ass day.
Yeah, I think like from what I've heard, I haven't done like research on this in particular, but a lot of programs and softwares like already have AI built in directly into the tools. I know like Photoshop does specifically for like their camera raw tool. They have like a photo resolution size up function that's like all on AI and it's pretty accurate. And I think it can like more than like double the size of your image just like using AI. But then even like smaller tools in Photoshop, like content aware, if you're like taking out like any kind of like dust from your image, I believe that that is based on an
I
AI.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I discovered what content aware
mhm.
was yesterday,
It's
and it blew.
amazing. I
It's
love
amazing.
it.
It's like what?
Yeah.
Like I didn't know that was in Photoshop. Like that's
Hmm.
crazy.
Yeah. So it's wild. It's like so it like these softwares have been incorporating it into their products for a while, but they don't like outright advertise it as AI. They might start now because of this movement that is kind of happening. It might be cool. It might be a flex for them to be like, we now have AI in our software, which I think like Adobe was kind of doing a little bit with that like photo scale up tool in Photoshop. But yeah, I think like AI assistance in softwares that we already use on a day-to-day basis, I think is a really great introduction to our workflow, just how we create images. Like, I think that's probably a good way to go.
Yeah, and um, what is it? Also, Photoshop has like they've been pushing their neural filters a lot lately. Which is kind of crazy because
Hmm.
like they've been putting a lot of companies are putting in a shit ton of money into AI. It's kind of exciting and scary at the same. But
Yeah.
I'll be optimistic.
It
um,
feels like there's like a race for this tech right now,
it's
you
true.
know?
It's true.
Yeah.
I know you have to go. Um, because you have some arrangements after, and so yeah. Would you like to say anything? Like, do you have any like upcoming drops that you'd like to talk about, or anything releasing soon?
Yeah, it's not a drop. I'm actually working on a commission right now for a an agency company, an organization. So I'm really excited
Ooh.
to get that out there. I can't talk about it a whole lot now, but it's going to be really exciting because it's working with AI, but not just cyanotype printing. It's kind of a
Okay.
different historic process. So I was doing a few test prints the other day, and I can't wait to just talk about it because I think it looks super cool. But that'll be done by the end of August. So I'm working away at that commission right now, and I can't wait to share it. But I think other than that, I mean, like just the work that I've been making with cyanotypes, like the 16 by 9 prints, I really want to mint those soon and maybe post them on a platform. I'm not sure which one yet, but I'm still kind of like thinking about that. And yeah, I've got lots of work up my sleeve. I just want to take my time. I don't like to rush things. I'm pretty patient when it comes to my work and minting things. So that's kind of what you can look forward to.
Oh yeah, I'm excited for real. Like your work in AI, and also the photography you have is very it's amazing. So it's
Oh,
just
thank you.
I'm excited, and I'm pretty sure those listening will be excited too. I've included your links that you have on your Twitter in the description, including your Twitter as well.
Hmm.
And so to those listening, please go check it out. Go buy the work. Go bid on the work. Go say hello because this is really good, great work, and we will most certainly have you on again because usually our artist talks go for like 2 hours, and so
Hmm.
I know you have some stuff to do, but also we just like I have an ongoing deal with all the other artists where it's like if you had fun and I had fun, then we will we will do this again because I think it's cool to also catch up with artists and see how they're going and about in the space, year to year and all that jazz.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
please. I'd love to just like catch up again, and maybe you can get started on some cyanotype prints, and we can come talk about how that's going. And I'd love to talk more about just like culture and AI and how that starts to evolve further.
Hell yeah. You know, you'll literally be the first person I hit up when I start messing with types, because
Yes,
I'll be like,
yes.
I'll fuck it up and be like, what have I done wrong? And you'll be like,
Help.
oh. But yeah, thank you for coming.
Yeah,
This was great. And to those listening, go check out the links in the description. Go say hello. And I will see you guys in the next talk. Have a good one. Bye.
amazing. Thanks so much. Thank you.